So Jesus once said he didn't come into the world to condemn people, but to love and to save people. To give sinners like us rest, mercy from our fears and from our worries, from our incompetent striving to work for our forgiveness and our freedom from guilt. Rest from burdened consciences and anxious futures. You are that sick-to-death person who has one day to live, and you meet Jesus on the Sabbath. The Pharisees would tell him to ignore you, but he heals you and you live. You are the disciple following Jesus because you love to hear from him and follow in his ways. And the Pharisees accost you and accuse you, but Jesus defends you. You are a sheep who falls into the pit on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees would ignore you. Jesus rescues you. So be a Sabbath breaker. Break free from obeying rules and religious rituals just for the sake of obeying rules and rituals. And obey them because you love them and you trust him who gives them, Jesus. Break the Sabbath by breaking free from pressures and guilt and giving yourself permission to be happy, even when it's not Sunday. Be a Sabbath breaker by breaking free from any religious ritual that does not help you explore, enjoy, expand on the words and works of God's mercy and love. Christian author Philip Yancey wrote a story about one of his friends who encountered a lady in Chicago, and this lady was poor and destitute, so poor and so hopeless that she sold her daughter as a prostitute for a 2-week period one summer. And then she confessed this to Philip Yancey's friend, who she knew was a Christian. And Yancey's friend asked her, did you at all, in your helplessness during that 2 weeks, did you at all think about going to the church? And Yancey writes that she got this look of astonishment on her face, and she cried out, "The church? Why would I go to the church? They would make me feel worse than I already did." You know people like that? I do. Here's how Yancey responds. He writes, "How did Jesus, the only perfect person in history, manage to attract the notoriously imperfect? And what keeps us from following in his steps today? Jesus was the friend of sinners. They liked being around him and longed for his company. Meanwhile, legalists like the Pharisees found him shocking, even revolting. There are people today who avoid the church because they feel the church is judgmental. There are people who avoid the Bible because they feel the Bible is just a big, long book of rules. There are people who avoid God because they consider God to be the ultimate policeman in the sky. But we can show them differently. We can respect and keep and observe the most stringent of God's rules and laws, and they are timeless and they're in the Bible, but we can obey them with this resonance of love. That we love God and love his word and love others so that we obey him. That's why. And others see that, and it'll make a difference as to how they perceive the church and the Bible and even God himself. I see that here at Grace. I see that in our worship, which perhaps has a few more rituals than most other Lutheran congregations or Christian churches, but those rituals and those ceremonies here at Grace are filled with meaning and mercy May they never be empty. I see that in our Bible studies. I see that in our grace groups and people who volunteer. I see that even in our giving, the love that is shown to God, not just obeying God's rules for rules' sake. And I'm not the only one who sees that. One of the more meaningful experiences on my vacation was when I received a phone call, kind of late one evening, from a gentleman who had been touched by the love of God, was kind of new to the congregation, rediscovering church a little bit. But somehow he got my cell phone number and he called me. And he was in the middle of a family crisis. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Pastor, I have never really asked anyone for help. But I'm asking you and God for help now because I know I can find it in this church." Amen.